Hello everybody, Dragon47 here. How is it going with all of you guys today? So, we are actually going to go straight on into the Adventures Unbound tier list. I didn't quite get every single Pokemon in this video, as I've said in previous tier lists. I'm just doing the main majority ones that you'll more than likely see up in those higher tier ranks, and ones that you'll probably constantly see throughout your Go Battle League experience. Yes, I know this one is for Great League, but Great League comes right after Master League, and now that we've finally had that first round of the Great League, we can kind of identify what mons are pretty good and which ones we're more than likely going to be seeing. So, without further ado, let's get straight on into the video. Kicking us off is the #1 Pokemon probably in the game for Great League, Medicham. Medicham's nerf last patch pretty much did absolutely nothing. This Pokemon is extremely powerful and is ranked #1 on PvPpoke.com right now, and has a good reason to be as well. This Pokemon is almost unstoppable unless you have a fairy on lock, and that's pretty much it. I mean, unless you're running Gligar, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But otherwise, this thing is a monster to behold. This next Pokemon is one of my personal favorites, one that I've been using for this season's Great League team, and he's actually my safe switch, Defense from Deoxys. He's actually really, really good right now. I'm going to put him in the A tier category. He's had a lot of buffs thanks to Noctowl no longer being a thing, so he has even more safe play than before, and Altaria also doesn't exist, so it makes it a lot easier for him to be able to run around without needing Rock Slide, and you can run Thunderbolt casually and do everything you really want. He's one of the best safe switches in the game right now. You can lead him if you really want to, and he's just a solid fighter who can also win against Medicham, mainly due to the bulk difference. It's just a good Pokemon. Next up is Poliwrath. Now, I was originally going to throw him into the B, but I've seen so much of him, and if it's Shadow, I guess I can make the argument to put it up in the A. This Pokemon is, again, like Deoxys, except less bulky and does a lot more damage. Ice Punch and Power Up Punch, very, very good moves. Ever since it got the counter ability, since the last Poliwag Calm Day, it got a whole lot better. The only thing I will say about this is if you're running Scald, it's to harm all those Earth types, but then you really lose out on hitting all of the ground types with Ice Punch, and you miss out on hitting, other things as well. I can see the argument for running Scald, but honestly, I think Ice Punch is the better move. And the next Pokemon we're going to talk about is none other than Scrafty. Scrafty is really good at taking out those Steel types, and he can deal a good amount of damage to those ground types. I will say he struggles nowadays because there is an increased amount of fairies ever since there are more fighter and ground types in the meta, and that's mainly due to the fact that we are in a very heavy ground and heavy fighting type meta. So the types that you're more than likely going to be seeing are fighting, ground for the main meta, and then for anti-meta you're going to be seeing a lot of ice, and you're going to see a lot of fairy. And for the reason of anti-meta to anti-meta, you're going to see steel, and you're going to see plant as the oddball element, because the plant types actually do well into a lot of these Pokemon that currently exist. So that's just kind of the main gist of the meta that we're kind of seeing, and for the reason being, Scrafty definitely got bumped down, but he's still a very solid Pokemon. The next Pokemon we're going to talk about is Hitmontop, and I think he's in C tier. He has a very solid moveset. Triple Axel is a very, very good move for him, but I honestly think that his playstyle is a bit gimmicky. You can make him work if you get correct alignment, but honestly, I think that he is just a bit worse than some of the better options that we currently have at the moment, and that kind of goes the same for Vigoroth. Vigoroth stayed exactly neutral this patch. He literally did not change at all. All of his matchups that he wants to win against are still here. He's really good at taking out Lickitung as well, which is kind of important because Lickitung is really, really good, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. But Vigoroth is also really good at demolishing those steel types, and he can do a pretty good handful of damage to those ice types, but other fighter mirror matches just tend to be not his forte. Next things next is Obstagoon. I'm going to go ahead and throw him in the D tier. Honestly, Obstagoon is good. He can take out those steel types just like all the other fighters can. And, well, he's decent enough at taking out some of the psychics. Like, he can do some decent damage to, like, Cresselia, and he can hurt Defense Form Deoxys in a sense. But the problem is, since we're in the fighter and kind of fairy-heavy format, Obstagoon just kind of falls lackluster, and that kind of goes same for Sirfetch'd, which also is going to go into the D tier. Honestly, these Pokemon are just not that great. They're kind of on the edge. They're not really just what you want to see. there are better options. Definitely run some of the better options as of the current moment, not these guys. Haxorus is going all the way into the bottom. He's just not good. The Calm Day that he had definitely helped him out and made him a much stronger Pokemon. I agree. Breaking Swipe is a broken move and a half. But the truth is, with all the Fairy, Ice types that are running around in meta right now, it just makes it hard for Haxorus to actually shine. And even the Earth does some decent damage to him. It's just not worth when there are literally a million better options. Machamp, I'm going to throw into C. The only reason I am throwing him up into C is because, honestly, he can take out Sableye, which is pretty big. But since he can't actually... Like, a lot of his good matchups were some of the Flyers, and they're gone now. So he's honestly more on the brink of not being as good, in my opinion. I know I'm kind of going against the PvPoke algorithm here, but in all honesty, I just don't see quite the value of him other than to take out Sableye, because a lot of his best matchups, like Lantern and even Noctowl in a sense, are gone. So moving forward, we're going to look at Dubwool. Dubwool is another one of those Pokemon that I'm going to throw into the C tier. It's fairly powerful. It's definitely got some stuff. With Wild Charge, he can take out things like Poliwrath, and he can take out Azu. He can deal good damage to those Steel types, and he can even take out Lickitung just like Vigoroth can, but unfortunately, he lacks like Vigoroth to other fighters, mainly due to his normal typing. The next category of our list is actually going to be the start of the Mud Boys. Let's get it. So, Mud Boys. These guys are guys with Mud Shot. They deal with good neutral damage all the way around the board. They're super effective Steel types, and they're just super solid Pokemon. And the first one we're going to throw into the S category is Swampert. This guy has always been good. The EQ nerf definitely nerfed a lot of these guys, but honestly, they're just as strong as they were, and a lot of them just moved over to Dig or the new Scorching Sands instead, and they're pretty much just fine as they are. Swampert can get away with it because he has Hydro Cannon. Good Pokemon, nothing new to cover here. Quagsire. Shadow Quagsire is definitely better than the regular one, but the regular one could be just as good with that extra bulk. Quagsire is a big, bulky boy. He does good neutral damage, and Stone Edge can deal with the few Flyers that we currently have in meta, and it's just a good hit. He is getting a Community Day in the future. You don't want to miss that, and you don't want to miss the Paldean Wooper with Clodsire on the way. I will be doing a special video all about that when he releases. We'll get to that in the future. Greedent, really good tank. I think he's even better in the Ultra League, but he's just as good in the Great League. He's super spammy. He can throw body slams left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. And yeah, he kind of loses to a bunch of the fighters, but that's okay because with how much bulk he has, he can eat hits for days from most of everything else. And that is what makes this Pokemon really, really good. Kind of brave, kind of controversial. I'm going to throw Diggersby straight into the B tier. If you align him correctly, he pops off. I love Hyper Beam Diggersby. He's one of my favorite things to run in this current meta. He's on my favorite team. I run him with the new move, Scorching Sands. And honestly, the new debuff on Scorching Sands is huge because it allows this bulky mon to suddenly flip matchups that normally he wouldn't win if he gets the debuff off, which is absolutely insane. Love the new Diggersby. Moving forward. Whimscash. I'm going to throw Whimscash into that C tier. The reason I'm throwing him lower than the others is because you don't normally run a Whimscash if you have any of these other guys as a main option, to run. He's definitely that guy that you want to run, though, if you want to do the double Mud Boy strat, because he can actually win against other Mud Boys with that Blizzard, which is really nice. But other than that, he really doesn't do a whole lot of good neutral damage across the board like these other Mud Boys do, and frankly, his nuke is one of the weaker nukes compared to all of these guys. It's just kind of mid. Galarian Stunfisk is no longer in the S. He's going into the A tier, and the reason for this is because the EQ nerf actually did affect him quite a little bit. He has always been on the brink of running out of S for a little while, and finally, with all of the addition of these new buff fighters, he has a lot to look out for, and Double Steel honestly isn't seen a whole lot, especially on this next one that we'll talk about here in literally a second, but a lot of the Flyers are gone too, and with the Flyers being gone, just like Machamp, the Rock Slides have no real good targets to be, throwing at other than potentially harming some of the other mons for neutral damage, and frankly, that's just not what's super great about this new meta change. The next Pokemon we're going to talk about is Steelix. Steelix is going straight into the S tier category. This Pokemon is amazing in both the Great and Ultra League. Breaking Swipe is such a broken move. Honestly, I'm not a fan of the move as a personal player because I'm getting so sick and tired of the toxic debuffs. But with the debuffs, it allows you to flip matchups that, again, you normally wouldn't win. And frankly, this Pokemon is really, really good at doing it. Just a bulk monster, and he still has Dragon Tail for that great neutral damage. The next Steel type we're going to talk about is Registeel. He's still in the S tier. He really didn't change a whole lot. The Earthquake nerf kind of made him better because now there's, you know, in a sense, he got better and worse this patch. The EQ nerf is nice, so Registeel can maybe survive maybe another Earthquake or two, depending. And frankly, he still has a lot of these normal type Pokemon that he can win matchups against. And there's a lot of these fighting types that are just part water. And in general, if you don't have a good fighter that can take out Registeel, or you don't have the correct ground type to take him out, he's just going to win. It's just a super good Pokemon. Nothing more to cover here. The next one is Bastiodon. I'm going to throw Bastiodon into the C tier. I don't think he's absolute garbage because there's still flyers in the meta that he absolutely walls. But the problem is a lot of the flyers do have super effective moves that do hurt him. And there's a lot of fighters and a lot of ground types in the meta that make him not so much fun to run. But if you get him lined up against some of those ice or fairy types that are currently in meta, he's going to run them over really effectively. Again, Steel is the anti-meta, so he's not going to be super duper high up there. Frankly, I almost want to put him into the D tier category, but I gotta admit that he's still got some stuff for him just because of his insane bulk. And that's pretty much what saves and justifies him. Next Pokemon, I've been preaching this for a long time, and nobody at all really listened to me. And now look at the Lickitung. My boy Lickitung has hit S tier. He's one of the top 5 best Pokemon in Great League at the current moment. That Power Whip doing super effective damage into the double time super effective damage into most of the Mud Boys. His Ghost type Lick is super good and it's taking out other threats like Sableye, and he can even take out things like Jellicent, which are the 2 main ghosts of the meta. He can just deal neutral damage across the board, and that Body Slam is so spammy, so good at dealing a whole bunch of just neutral damage. Lickitung is the G. He is goated. Definitely would be running him this meta if I had enough XL candies. And if you do have enough XL candies, I highly suggest giving Lickitung a try. He's very, very fun. Next up is Carbink. Carbink is arguably the best tank in the game. This thing is an absolute bulk monster, and despite it having Rock Slide, which is kind of an okay move for sure at this meta, not super grand, it's really nice because it provides him a good bait move for his Moonblast attack, and since we don't really have Altaria anymore, the new Moonblast user is going to have value because he can take out all those fighters and Darks with pretty much just one Moonblast. It's very effective, and honestly, he just eats them hits. He's just very good Pokemon. If you got enough of him during the Go Fest, congratulations. And if you don't have enough of him, this is my tip to you. Go play the Go Battle League, hit rank 6, try to get at least 3 wins every set, and if you can help it, maybe you'll run into a Carbink. If you get a good Carbink, the good IVs are 5, 15, 15. For 5 attack, 15 defense, 15 HP. And if you don't have it and you have a best friend, that is like the perfect IV floor for trading. Because if you get the 5, 15, 15 from your friend, it will be very good for you in the Great League. One of my friends did that, and they managed to get a 98 point, I think it was a 98.6 because they had a 6, 15, 15. It was very effective because it allowed them to be able to run Carbink this meta, and they're doing really good because of it. So, there you go. Next things next is Mandibuzz. Mandibuzz I'm going to put into the A tier. This mon is bulky, and I mean bulky. Thanks to the Aerial Ace rework. And honestly, you see it partnered a lot with Swampert, kind of like how back in the day we used to partner Skarmory with Swampert, but Skarmory is like really, really bad now. So a lot of people are dropping Skarm and are picking up Mandibuzz instead, and it's doing pretty much just as good as it was before. Very solid bulk Pokemon moving forward. Another really good tank this meta, I'm going to put in the A tier, is Cresselia. This thing is so good. at fighting those pesky fighters that you don't like. And with Grass Knot, it actually can do a lot of damage into the ground users as well. You have to be kind of careful because there are there's one pseudo ghost and 2 actual ghosts that are running around the meta. So you do gotta watch out for that. And you do kind of have to watch out for Scrafty a little bit because those foul plays are gonna hurt like really bad. And that goes same for Greet It with Crunch as well. And if Double, for some reason, is running the dark move that it can learn, then you have to watch out for that as well. But otherwise, it's a super duper safe Pokemon. Definitely wish I had one. You're probably going to see it more in the Ultra League as opposed to the Great League, but it's still a good Pokemon. Next Pokemon we're going to talk about is none other than Umbreon. So I'm going to be real with you. Umbreon is going to go into the D tier for me. This bulk Pokemon is really, really good if you partner it correctly, mainly with like Defense Form Deoxys. But that's like the only way to make him playable. I guess you could kind of give him with Medicham and do some decent stuff. He just struggles right now because there are so many fighters in the meta. And almost every single person is running some sort of fighter on their team or a Registeel. And frankly, it's just rough to try and run an Umbreon out there, especially with the rise of fairy users as well. It's just difficult to try to get this Pokemon off. Still solid due to its bulk, but more difficult to play. The next Pokemon, Azumarill, straight into the A tier. I think this thing is a sleeper. I almost wanted to put it into the S tier. This thing has all of the coverage and all of the bulk to win almost anything you need in this current meta. You need something to deal with the fighters? Boom, Play Rough. You need something to deal with the ground types? Boom, Ice Beam. You need something to deal with the steals? Maybe drop one of the others and run Hydro Pump. Bubble is its best fast move still, and it absolutely rocks the current meta. Absolute monster. Azumarill definitely got way giga buffed this patch, and I guarantee you'll see a lot of top players using it. Hands down. Okay, so Lantern. Lantern is kind of a weird one. A lot of people argue that this Pokemon got nerfed. A lot of people argue this thing got buffed. In my respective opinion, I think it got nerfed. And here's my reasoning why. It used to be really good at doing spammy moves and throwing good spam attacks at those ground types and honestly threatening them and keeping them at bay. With the nerf to the energy with Spark, Earthmons are now way more effective against it than what it normally was. And honestly, for that reason, it makes the Mon a bit weaker. And with all of its best targets being flyers pretty much gone and not existent, it makes it a lot harder to actually run this thing and win matchups. Now, granted, in exchange, it did get a damage buff, so this thing is hitting for a lot more, and it's hurting a lot more for its normal attacks, but I do think that for this reason, it's probably going to sit and see with me. If you're running this thing just to snipe at Azu, Poliwrath, and Mandibuzz, maybe even Medicham, I think you're doing it wrong. You could run something that targets all three that isn't Lantern and do just as good. I'm not going to say it's garbage, but I think we're finally to that point where there are just better options to run right now. All right, new kid on the block. We're going to put Greninja. Part of me wants to put him in C, but I can make the argument for putting him in B. Greninja is very, very glassy. And he doesn't necessarily have a good time against the other fighters in the current meta. But if you keep him away from certain fighters in the meta, and you have him go up against some of those ground types that exist, or even some of those psychics that are out there, like Cresselia, Deoxys, and even Medicham, he does pretty good. Because Night Slash gives him a huge damage boost, and with that huge damage boost that he gets, he can take out a lot of these Pokemon really incredibly fast. Like I said, he's kind of glassy, so you have to be a bit careful, but honestly not a terrible Pokemon. He does a lot of damage, you just got to know how to play him right, and you got to know when to shield and what to shield on your team. This Pokemon is part of the Ghost Gang. We're going to talk about Jellicent. He's a bulky Pokemon. He can take out Medicham, he can take out Deoxys and Cresselia. Pretty solid all the way around. He can win against some of the ground types, which is pretty good. And he goes, neutral into a bunch of the fighters. He struggles against, like, majority of the steel types though, and he still has to watch out for the other ghost type in meta. We'll get to that here literally up next. Overall, he's solid. He just lacks damage and lacks, honestly, a good fast move. Not much else to say here. The next Pokemon we're going to talk about is Sableye. Sableye going straight into the S tier for me. Sableye is a monster in the Great League at the current moment, and he just crushes Medicham. He crushes the other ghosts, and he destroys a lot of the other fighters as well just by merely existing. He's got to watch out for some of those normal types like Vigoroth, Lickitung, and Diggersby, but if he's not running himself into any of those, he has a pretty good time in the meta. The only other thing I'd say about him is maybe keep him away from some of the fairies, because the fairies are definitely going to hurt a little bit, like Azu. But in general, he's just so good because he wins against so many other matchups. It's actually ridiculous. And he's only going to get stronger with these new mons that are going to be coming up meta, like I said about Swampert, and maybe I'll cover that in a future video. Let's keep moving on to this list. Pelipper. I'm going to throw Pelipper in A. Despite all of the birds mainly dying, Mandibuzz got buffed and Pelipper literally did not move. I'm just going to go out and say it. He can destroy the Earth types. He can eat Quagsires, Alolan Ninetales, which isn't even an Earth type. He can destroy, like, Greedent and Diggersby with ease, and he still wins into Galarian Stunfisk. Like, if anything, Pelipper is just fine, and with flying, he can take out a lot of the fighters. And that kind of goes the same for his counterpart, Mantine, except the difference between the two is Pelipper does way more damage, and Mantine is a bit bulkier. I think Pelipper is the better choice. Mantine's just kind of there, in a sense, if you don't have Pelipper or you need more bulk for your team. Gligar. Gligar I'm going to put into the S tier. This thing, ever since the new Dig and Aerial Ace buff, got crazy. And if you do subtract one of them for Night Slash, that's kind of justifiable if you want to deal with some of the Psychics like Cresselia or Deoxys. But I don't know. I feel like you just run something different to take out those. Gligar is really, really good. And honestly, I wish I had one, but I don't. Super strong Pokemon. Gotta watch out for those Ice-type attacks because those really, really hurt. But otherwise, super solid Pokemon. Charizard. Charizard, I'm gonna... How do I put this? He was in the World Championships a lot. He was really, really good. But now, here comes my issue. He wins against all the Steel types. Like, hands down, he can destroy Steel types with ease. And he can even deal with a lot of the Earth and fighters that are currently on the board. Just because Blast Burn is that effective. However, and I do mean however, Carbink exists. Other tanks that aren't Carbink or aren't a Steel type exist. And Charizard struggles against all of them. And even fighters like Deoxys or like other fighters that have rock, particularly rock moves, even Quagsire, are just such big threats to this thing. Part of me wants to put him in B. Part of me wants to keep him in A. He's definitely not S. That's for sure. I think he requires a large amount of skill to play to be more of an up here Pokemon, but I could see people making the argument of putting him like all the way down to the C or D category just because, you know, he struggles in this meta right now. It's rough to try and run him. I'm going to keep him up in A because I think that's about the best of where he can go for the good player out there, but otherwise it's just not worth. And lastly, for the Flyers, we have Tropius. I'm going to put him in E. Look, guys, I love Tropius, don't get me wrong, but here's my issue. Even though there are a lot of ground types out there for you to chew up and you have resistance against the fighters, there's so many other flyers out there. Well, not really flyers, but there's so many other ice types out there and flyers that are just going to ruin your day. And you really have to get alignment right. And if they're running like, I don't know, double mud, you still lose because there's a Whimscache in the back, more than likely. Right? Like, it's just rough. Honestly, I think he's just mid. I don't know what else to say. Milrin into the D tier. That EQ nerf hurt a lot. And I do feel bad for all you Whaleren gamers out there, but at the same time, it's like, you know, he's been meta for such a long time. They brought him back earlier. Now the Flyers are gone. There's not as many targets, and your EQ got nerfed, and you don't get the stab, or STAB, same type attack ability, like the other ones do. And honestly, it just kind of sucks to suck. I don't know what else to say. Sorry for all you gamers out there. Moving on. Alolan Ninetales. So this thing has been falling lower and lower out of the meta as the days come and go. It's still solid. Again, I pretty much put it on that wall of, okay, if you can beat this thing, you're meta. If you can't, then you're struggling. This thing is a true counter to the meta at the moment because it's a fairy ice and it stops all the fighters and most of the mud boys. But it struggles against those steel types and literally can't do anything about it. And this thing also just kind of gets domed by anything that can learn Rock Slide. So Galarian Stunfisk becomes a threat, Machamp becomes a threat, and especially Carbink. Carbink is like a nightmare for this thing. It's just rough to try and run. It's doable, but you gotta watch out for those rock users. Frostless I'm going to put in the D. If you're using this thing to target Medicham, you're doing it wrong. You have other options that you can probably run. And if you are using this thing, well, it's because you hate Medicham and you're trying to hurt some of the Earth users. It's an alright Pokemon. It has good moves. But the same problem with Whaleren and Alolan Ninetales. There's so many other rocks out there that's going to hurt it. And it loses to every other ghost that exists out here. Because Jellicent is more bulky and Sableye goes neutral. I think you just run one of those two over Frostless at the moment. No doubt about it in my mind. Dugong. Dugong is the top grossing Pokemon right now. It is the top #1 performer, I should say. Not the rank one, but the top performer. This thing has good moves, good bulk, and wins a lot. But the issue is that he requires super specific team comps, and that team comp usually comes in the form of Defense Form Deoxys and Umbreon, or just that and Defense Form Deoxys and Sableye. It's just super specific. The team does good, don't get me wrong, but I'm afraid that not everybody has Defense Form Deoxys, so this thing doesn't see a whole lot of play. That, and you still have to watch out for fighters, which counter this thing down, and some of the steel types as well, because some of the steel types do tend to hurt this thing. Alolan Sandslash. This thing, I was this close to putting into the S tier. But I'm going to put it into the A tier for now. This thing counters, like, everything up here. He counters Medicham. He can win against Registeel and Steelix, right? Because of the drill run. He can go toe-to-toe with... He can win into Carbink. He loses to Lickitung, and he does really, really well in the Gligar, and even does good into Sableye. This thing is just such a powerful anti-top Metamon, but when it comes to everything else below the meta, he's just kind of struggles a little bit against. He can do some serious damage, but, you know, he's not the, again, kind of like Greninja, he's not the bulkiest mon, and he's kind of glassy, and you need the Shadow variant in order for him to be good. So for that reason, I'm going to put him in A. The Dragons. Okay, so the Dragons this meta both struggle a lot. There's a lot of fairies, a lot of ice. These things are still good because they can take down the fighters and they can take down majority of the other things as well, especially the plants. But at the moment, I'm just going to go ahead and throw both of them in C. They're both struggling a lot, and honestly, Dragon's about kicked out of this meta. It's just rough. If Charizard is barely making the A cut, these guys definitely aren't making, you know, the greatest impact either. Up next is our plant lineup. So these guys are actually the plants that are doing pretty good in the Great League at the moment. These guys are kind of breaking the meta because they either got buffed, especially Superior here with the new Aerial Ace buff, or they're just performing well because their main threat, which was Flyers, is now so low to the point where these guys can actually see some viable play. So, without further ado, Superior, we're going to throw straight into the B tier. That thing with Aerial Ace is very, very effective. It all of a sudden can mirror the other grass types and win. It can destroy the fighters because Aerial Ace is effective against that, and it can hit the ground type users as well just by being a plant. Super duper effective. It's going to struggle against the few Flyers we do have. It's going to struggle fairly good against, you know, some of the other anti-metamons that we have here. And honestly, you got to watch out for those ice mons. That's what really caps the plant type users down, is the constant ice types. But these guys can do pretty well if you get them aligned correctly. Most people save them in the back with shields, but for some of them you could also lead them, and I can see the reasoning why. Next is Lurantis. I'm going to throw Lurantis into the B tier. This thing got Leafage, but honestly, I still think you run Leaf Blade as opposed to that. Super strong Pokemon. It can take out Steel types, which is kind of weird. So you have one that takes out the Steel types, and you have one that takes out the Fighters. With Superpower on Lurantis, it makes it so that it can take out the Steel types, and that's really, really neat. And it's definitely got some play this meta for sure. Venu, I kind of want to throw into the A tier. I can make argument to throw him into the B, but I think for now we're just going to keep him on... No, I'm going to throw him in B with the other plant types. He's honestly decent. He has double resistance against all of the fighters, and yeah, he's fairly good against most of the steel types and the few waters that we have out here as well. But he has the same problem as all other ice type or plant types. He loses to ice like incredibly bad, actually even worse than the other two that we previously had mentioned. And he really loses out to a lot of the psychics that we have here as well. So all of a sudden the, Deoxys, Cresselia, and Medicham just don't seem that bad running into this thing. Honestly, he's just kind of there as an optional plant type if you don't have the other two. And finally, last but never the least, we have the new Oinkoloin. Guys, he's in E tier. I love the pig, but let's be real here. As a normal type Pokemon, it struggles against all of the fighters. He has Dig, so he can do stuff into the steel types if it's not Registeel with Focus Blast. And yeah, he can take out Carbink, which is kind of cool. But honestly, this thing just struggles when it comes to all the fighters. And it's a cool Pokemon, but it needs a better fast move before it can really start to shine. And there you go, that does it. That pretty much is the entire tier list. This is pretty much my speculation of what I would see or suggest it to be. I know others may have controversial opinions, but this is the one I decided to make. If you want to see some of the changes on this thing, please let me know down in the description what you would change. Maybe you would want something else in the S tier. Maybe you want something lower. But this is ultimately just my analysis of what I have seen so far. And I guess we'll continue to change that as more moves get changed and edited, and moves get, Pokemon get nerfed or buffed. Without further ado, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.